You've blinked several times just reading this sentence, and you'll blink several thousand more times before today is even over, almost entirely without noticing any of them happening. That's far more often than your eyes actually need simply to stay moist and lubricated. Researchers studying exactly why humans blink this much more than necessary have found something genuinely surprising happening inside the brain during each and every single blink. Blinking does serve a genuine biological purpose, spreading tears evenly across the eye's surface and keeping it properly lubricated throughout the day. But researchers estimate that purely for lubrication purposes alone, the eye would only need to blink somewhere around 3 to 4 times per minute, a fairly modest, easily manageable rate. Actual measured human blink rates run considerably higher, typically somewhere between 15 and 20 times per minute for most people under normal conditions, several times more frequently than pure maintenance would seem to require. That's a substantial mismatch between what basic eye maintenance requires and what people actually do throughout an ordinary day, one worth genuinely questioning rather than simply accepting as unremarkable. A useful clue toward the real explanation shows up during focused visual tasks like reading, something almost everyone has personal experience with already. Blink rate drops noticeably while reading intently, since blinking briefly interrupts the visual information your eyes are actively gathering from the page in front of you moment by moment. But it doesn't drop anywhere close to zero, even during genuinely demanding, highly focused reading that requires sustained concentration. If blinking were purely reactive, simply responding to dryness building up on the eye's surface, that pattern doesn't fully explain why blinking specifically clusters around certain moments rather than others entirely unrelated to actual eye dryness in any measurable way. Blink rate itself changes dramatically across a human lifespan, offering another interesting clue about what's actually driving it, beyond anything happening purely on the surface of the eye. Infants blink remarkably rarely, often just once or twice per minute, far below typical adult rates, even though their eyes presumably need roughly comparable lubrication to function properly and stay healthy. Blink rate then climbs steadily through childhood before eventually settling into the higher adult range most people maintain for the rest of their lives, decades later. That steady climb roughly tracks the ongoing maturation of dopamine-related brain systems during early development, adding yet another thread connecting blink frequency to something happening deep inside the brain, not simply happening on the surface of the eye itself in isolation. A widely cited 2013 study led by researcher Tamami Nakano found something genuinely striking about exactly when people tend to blink, rather than assuming it happened at essentially random moments throughout the day. Participants watching video footage, including a well-known television show used specifically for this experiment, didn't blink randomly throughout the viewing at all. Their blinks consistently clustered around natural breakpoints in the footage, scene cuts, pauses between lines of dialogue, and moments when a character exited the frame entirely. Rather than clustering during visually or narratively important moments, a viewer would need to actively watch closely without missing anything. Nakano's follow-up research, using brain imaging, found something even more specific tied directly to these clustered blinking moments, going well beyond simply confirming the timing pattern itself. During these attention-related blinks specifically, brain regions associated with the default mode network, a network generally linked to internal reflection and mind-wandering rather than active external focus, showed a brief, measurable increase in activity, appearing and then disappearing again within a fraction of a second. In other words, a blink isn't simply your eyelid closing for a fraction of a second. It may double as an extremely brief, almost imperceptible mental pause, tucked neatly inside a biological function your body was already going to perform constantly anyway, regardless of what else was happening around you. This kind of built-in mental reset carries genuine practical value once you consider the alternative available to a brain that needs sustained focus for long stretches at a time. Sustained, uninterrupted attention over a long stretch of time is metabolically demanding and difficult to maintain cleanly without some form of brief recovery built in along the way. Rather than needing a separate, dedicated break disconnected entirely from an ongoing task, which would require consciously stepping away from whatever's happening, folding these tiny resets directly into an existing, biologically necessary function would let attention refresh itself constantly and efficiently without ever requiring someone to consciously stop paying attention to their surroundings at all. Picture a normal, everyday conversation where research has found blinking clusters heavily around natural pause points, right after the other person finishes speaking, or during small conversational gaps, rather than in the middle of an important sentence someone's actively delivering to you directly. That timing lines up closely with a system quietly capitalizing on genuinely low-stakes moments to grab a brief mental reset, precisely when doing so costs the least in terms of misinformation or social cues, then smoothly returning full attention right as new, potentially important information starts flowing again from whoever's speaking. Separate research has uncovered another genuinely interesting wrinkle tied to blinking, one that connects this entire discussion to something even more fundamental happening inside the brain's chemistry. Spontaneous blink rate appears to correlate with dopamine activity levels in the brain, a neurotransmitter closely tied to motivation, reward, and movement control. This connection has actually been used as a rough, non-invasive research tool in some studies, including certain investigations into Parkinson's disease, a condition closely tied to disrupted dopamine signaling, and studies exploring reward-related behavior like gambling, where dopamine activity plays a well-documented central role in driving repeated behavior. One specific line of research looked at spontaneous blink rate during simple gambling tasks, where anticipation of a potential reward reliably triggers real, measurable dopamine activity in the brain well before any actual payout is revealed. Researchers found blink rate patterns shifted in ways that tracked reasonably well with the anticipated reward structure of the task itself, rising and falling alongside the shifting odds and stakes involved in each round. This added another small piece of evidence connecting ordinary, everyday blinking to the same underlying reward-related brain chemistry involved in anticipation and motivation more broadly, not simply eye maintenance considered in isolation from everything else happening upstairs in the brain at the exact same time. It's worth being fair about how solid this specific dopamine connection actually is, since using blink rate as a stand-in measurement for dopamine activity remains a genuinely imperfect, actively debated research tool, rather than a precise, fully validated clinical measurement researchers universally agree on. The underlying relationship between blinking and dopamine isn't completely settled at the mechanistic level either, and results can vary meaningfully between different clinical populations and healthy individuals studied under different experimental conditions, sometimes producing inconsistent findings from one study to the next. This remains a real, active area of ongoing neuroscience research, rather than a fully closed, unanimously agreed-upon question with a single clean answer everyone accepts without reservation. Understood this way, blinking looks less like a simple maintenance chore your eyes perform in the background, and more like a tiny, constantly recurring reset button woven directly into basic eye function itself, hiding in plain sight the entire time. Thousands of times every single day, without you ever consciously noticing it happening, your brain appears to be quietly capitalizing on a biological necessity you were already going to perform anyway, using it as convenient cover for a brief, genuinely useful mental pause tucked neatly into an otherwise completely ordinary, unremarkable physical action. The next blink you take without thinking twice about it might be doing considerably more work than simply keeping your eyes comfortable and moist, quietly serving a second purpose most people never think to question. That's exactly the kind of hidden thread this channel exists to dig up. If you want more of these, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.